In this video, I want to talk about how to make the most of new business inquiries. The reality is that new business is the lifeblood of property rentals. Your rent roll will suffer from a thing called natural attrition. And natural attrition is simply the fact, the inescapable fact, that you will lose business even if you are doing absolutely everything right and delivering the very, very best service. Why? Well, life changes. Landlords decide to sell, people pass on, and the people who inherit don't necessarily want a rental property, and landlords decide to move back into their rental properties. So unless you are continuously signing up new rentals and growing your rent roll is going to diminish. There's no such thing as standing still. Because as these rental properties leave your portfolio is going to shrink, your income's going to shrink, and that's not even taking inflation into account. So what's luck got to do with it? You know, when somebody's successful, they always say, oh, they're so lucky, they get all these opportunities. The reality of life is, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. That's something that was said many years ago, and I remember learning this in my very first real estate training. And at that point in time, I pondered about it, but over time, I've got to learn that it's absolutely true. You can get the opportunities, but the opportunities, if you haven't prepared for those opportunities, is absolutely wasted. So it's luck, or rather what we can rather call success, is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. You're working on the opportunities. Do the preparation. I'm going to give you some tips in this video. Do the preparation to make sure that you get lucky or that you're successful when the opportunity comes along. And that's the secret sauce, preparation. The difference between successful and unsuccessful people is not that the one is better than the other. It's simply that they've prepared. I'm sure that successful and unsuccessful people can do the same amount of hard work, they can get the same amount of opportunities, but unless they've prepared, they're simply not going to get lucky or be successful. So the big difference is preparation. I'm going to give you some ideas in this video on how to prepare for that very first inquiry that you're going to get to increase your chances of have that turning into a successful rental listing for you. The first thing is to have a script or a framework so that you've practiced something and you're not like a deer in the headlights. I'll give you a script at the end of this video that you can download, and that gives you a bit of a framework, or could we call it a storyline to follow, and some ideas about the sort of information you can get that'll help you prepare to make this a successful opportunity for you. The next thing is you've got to practice it. It's got to sound natural and it's got to flow. And one thing that really, really works, and I know people hate it immensely, is role play. I hated it when I started in real estate and did my first sales course in those days, and we had to do role play. I found it so embarrassing and so uncomfortable. But you know what? I found out after that, it helps. Nothing in real life will ever be that bad again. When you sit with a client, it is so easy peasy in comparison to having to do role play. So I suggest you, when you've got the script, you do a little bit of role play with either your partner, maybe somebody at work, form a group, but honestly, it really, really works. And remember that nobody that's successful was born successful. Practice makes perfect, and real estate is the same. You learn from others. I'm going to give you some ideas in this video, but you learn from others. But then you can't just take that, you've got to make it your own and adapt it. And most importantly, you always have to be yourself. You can't be anyone else. So take what you learn, make it your own, practice it, adapt it for your own way of working, but always be yourself. Because if you're not going to be yourself, or you're going to pretend or try to be someone else, it's just you're not going to be able to pull it off. Only shysters can do that. The reality is that you need to make it your own. This is often the very first question that you'll get when somebody calls in. Hi, I'm thinking of renting out my property. I just want to find out, how much do you charge? The question is, how do you deal with that? Because those sorts of people, you know that whatever answer you're going to give, there's going to be somebody else that gave a better answer. So you need to try and avoid this question right at the beginning. And I'm going to give you some thoughts on that. The first way to say that is, we've got a number of different packages. If I could just get some information from you, I'll be able to advise you better. Learn these things, practice them. So somebody says to you, I just want to find out how much you charge. You say, well, we've got a number of different packages that start at, let's say, 8%. But it really depends on the service that we're going to offer you. So if you could just give me some information and answer some questions, I'll be able to give you much better advice. I think that's a good way. That postpones this question. And as we go through the framework that I've put together for you and that I'm going to cover in this video, you'll get a good idea of where we're going to get to this and the advantage of trying to not just give a number, because that number will often end this conversation. You want to use this conversation as an opportunity to start building this relationship. Step number 1, get the contact information. It is the absolute priority. I'm sure you've had the situation where you're, for example, on a cell phone call, or you try and call somebody and you get cut off, and then you're lost. This person is looking, the person that's just called you is looking for a rental agent, okay? Get your name and number. Something like, could I grab your name and number so I can call you back in case we get cut off? Would you like me to call you back? It's just a simple way of doing that. But make sure you get a name and number so that if anything happens and you get cut off, you have the opportunity to call them back, and it's not the end of that opportunity. Because remember, you're doing all this preparation, you need to make the most of this opportunity. And we all know technology can be temperamental. Next question is, who are you speaking to? Now that sounds, we've just said name and number, but that's not what I mean. What we're trying to ascertain here is, are we speaking to the owner of the property? Is it your property we're talking about? Do you own the property? The reason that we're doing this is to find out if we're dealing with the decision maker or maybe just a messenger, I suppose you can say. You don't want to waste your time if it's just a messenger. I've also had situations in my career where, for example, it turns out it's a tenant in a property that's not necessarily pretending they're the owner, but inquiring about it because they're trying to get an idea of whether they're paying market-related rent or not. And so they're being a little bit deceitful, I suppose you could say. I don't say it's wrong, but if the landlord finds out that you've given the tenant a rental appraisal, for example, on a property, and it's against, or the tenant uses it to try and negotiate their rent down, it can create a very messy situation. It's not illegal, but you really want to avoid that situation. So, is it your property we're talking about? Do you own the property? That's a very simple question to ask initially, and it gives you a very good idea of who you're talking about. And then, of course, if it's not the owner that you're speaking to, you can find out what their relationship is to the owner as well. And then you know that whatever information you give this person, you're going to have to speak to the owner as well. So I think it's very important to find this out right at the beginning and try and get the owner's information so you can find out and ascertain that the person you're speaking to, and this is required in the end under FICA as well, that if you're speaking to a third party, you need to ascertain that they have the authority of the owner to speak with. Now, we're not entering into a business relationship yet, so FICA isn't coming into the matter, but you may as well find out the lay of the land at this point in time. Then, of course, you need to get some basic information at very least about the property. Could I just get some info about the property so I'm able to better assist you? That's a simple question. What sort of information are we talking? The area the property is in, the type of property, whether the property is furnished or not. Now, I wouldn't deal with, after initial experiences, I wouldn't deal with furnished rental properties anymore. So this would be at the point that if the person says it's furnished, I can explain my situation to them and say to them, look, I don't deal with furnished properties. These are the reasons I don't deal with furnished properties. Maybe you want to reconsider your position on furnished, because honestly, it doesn't matter which tenant you can get the best tenant in the world, there will be damage to your property. And because it's your own property, you obviously are linked to it and you care about it. And would you really like somebody else damaging it? That often makes people think about it. The other question, of course, is whether there's parking. Remember, the next step in this process is probably going to be something like a rental evaluation that you're going to be doing for the owner on the property. So you need this basic information to at least do some homework before you make that appointment, or before you go to that appointment to meet with the owner and look at the property. It's also a fact that at some point you're going to be asked, How much rent do you think I can get? And once you've got the answers to these questions, you're able to do some homework on the current market situation. The worst thing you can ever do is just give a number off the top of your head. That makes people think that it's a simple business. It's not. You've got to look, the market's changing all the time. And even if you rented something in that area that sounds similar, until you've seen the property, you can't really give an answer. And please don't ever give a rental appraisal unless you've seen the property. You can be opening yourself up to a major can of worms because you don't know. The property could be half falling apart. So just get some basic property information, because in the next step we're going to get to valuations. And before you go and see the owner, you want to arm yourself with information. So get some basic information so that you can go and do the research and take along information for when you meet with them. What's the current rental situation? This is often a question that is missed. And the question could be something like, is the property currently rented? If so, who's managing it? When will the tenants be moving out? Opening up this line of questioning helps you glean a whole lot of information. You'll find out whether the owner has been managing things themselves, whether they've had any properties. Remember, you're creating a dialogue here. And one of the purposes of this whole conversation is to start that relationship. This business is all about relationships. And even if it's just a simple phone call at this point in time, you're asking all the right questions. And if they're calling different agencies, for example, which people often do, and the one agency just says, well, I think you're going to get this and my fees are this, and doesn't go any further, and you're asking these questions, I think it makes you look better than them. Somewhere the landlord's going to realize, but you're asking these questions, and you can motivate why you need these questions so that you know exactly where they stand. When will the tenants be moving out? If it's rented, for example. If it's not rented, have you currently been living in the property? Those sorts of questions, it helps you build the relationship from the very beginning. And this, remember, is the very first impression you're having an opportunity to make. And I know it's a very trite saying, but first impressions only occur once. So you need to really, really make the most of this. So be interested, ask these questions, and that's the way you start looking professional, because you're asking the questions. You can explain to the landlord as well that, look, I need to go and do some homework. Yes, I do. I'm in rentals, and yes, I am an expert in the field, but the reality is the market's changing all the time. So I really do need to go and look at what is currently, I need to look at the current competition. So what's currently for rent? So I do need this basic information. Then, of course, remember we had the point where I said you don't just give them an answer. You say it depends on what services you're interested in. We now get to the point where we start asking them. And I think this is quite important. There's a list of questions that I've got in my guidelines that I'm going to give you that you'll be able to download out of the blog post that helps you not only understand what they're looking for, but could possibly help you also upsell. Don't use words like procurement and management unless you're sure that the caller is experienced. Remember, you work in this field. You know exactly what you're talking about, but a lot of people that are calling you have never ever rented a property before. And a procurement and a management they might have a concept of, but they don't really know. So speak in their language. So would you like us to do a rental appraisal on the property? Is a simple question that you can ask. Then the next question is, would you like us to find and screen a tenant? Procurement doesn't explain it as well. Would you like us to find and screen a tenant? Find and screen explains exactly what you're doing. It's not just a matter of finding a tenant. And then you can explain, you can even, if this can develop into a conversation at this point. And then when you say screen, you can explain to them exactly what you do. The reality is that you look at income. You ask for proof of income. You do a credit check, for example. And it makes, especially for people who are beginners in property rentals, it gives them an idea of how complicated things are. And you can have the opportunity, for example, when you're talking about find and screen, you can have the opportunity to say to them, you won't be able to get access to a credit check. I get a credit check and I do a credit check on all the tenants. That's why we charge for this service, and that's why you're probably best off, even if you're only going to use us to find and screen your tenant, you're probably better off using a rental agent. Would you like us to collect rent? Would you like us to do arrears management? Of course, the conversation can open up once again, where people could be like, no, but we're going to screen the tenant, so there's never going to be arrears. And you can explain to them that despite the best of screening, you can have rent arrears. And you can explain exactly what you do. On day number 1, we give them a call or we send them an email. On day number 2, we send them a letter of demand. I know that sounds really harsh, Mr. or Mrs. prospective landlord, but the reality of life is we know that this is what works. And if there's a problem, there's a process that needs to be followed. And to be able to follow that process, we need to tick the first box in the process. And the first box is a letter of demand. So yes, we do that. You've got to be absolutely diligent with these things, because the people that show up the best in, not necessarily, or have a clean credit record, let's put it that way, it doesn't mean they're not going to run into problems. And as sad as that might be, and as much empathy as what we have for their problems, my job is to look after you as the landlord. Would you like us to manage the maintenance? Would you like us to do interim inspections? Would you like us to pay your property expenses? Would you like us to invoice and collect the tenant's utilities? A lot of people who are new in this business, remember, these questions aren't just yes-no answers. They will often end up having more of a conversation, and you can explain exactly what you have. And this is the point, that if they are pushing you on the percentage of what you charge or on your fees, you can have the opportunity to explain to them exactly what you do for those fees, and then explain the different packages. This just opens up that whole line of questioning. Another nice one that I like is, would you like us to invest and manage the deposit? A lot of DIY landlords or do-it-yourself landlords don't do what the Rental Housing Act says they must do. They don't understand that they have to invest the deposit in an interest-bearing account. And they've got to be able to account to the tenant. The tenant at any point in time is entitled to say, what is my deposit and interest currently worth? So I think that asking these questions just gives you such a good opportunity to explain your services, to also maybe just alert the landlord, if they haven't thought about it, that these things need to be done. And do they really want to take this on their own? Then number 6, by the way, we go to number 7. How do I arrange access? Now that might sound like a silly question, but it will give you a very good idea of how easy it is to get access to this property. Remember, to get the property rented, you need to be able to get into the property. So you need to be able to get access. So if they say, for example, that, oh no, our current tenant's very difficult, blah, 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 and so you're going to have to work through us or something like that, you're going to have some red flags showing. And red flags are bad flags. I always say that when you see a red flag, you know it actually means stop. It's like a red robot. So if there's anything that sounds complicated about access, you might want to think to yourself, is this an opportunity that I actually do want to pursue further? Or is this an opportunity that is just sounding far too complicated? And then most importantly, make a time to meet. Nothing beats face-to-face. There's a lovely quote that I found online that said, people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I believe there's only one way to give people a feeling. You're trying to do the best in this opportunity, but the reality is that getting face-to-face, belly-to-belly, whatever you want to call it, the reality there is that people get a feeling about you. I call it the warm feeling in the tummy. And I believe that just think of yourself, when you're looking at a service provider, let's say you speak to 3 different plumbers. The one that sounds the most confident, that is giving you some advice that sounds reasonably, I looked for a plumber one night and I had to call 7 because one of our rental properties had an issue. Some of them just said, no, I don't work after hours. Others said, what is it? And I said, it's, there's no hot water. No, I'm not interested. So there's also it's creating an impression of you, but you've got to get face to face to get that warm feeling in the tummy. So make sure that before you end this call, you have a time and a place that you're going to meet, preferably with the owner. Anybody else is not a decision maker. The owner is the person you need to start making that relationship with. So make sure that as soon as possible, and if you can't meet the owner at the property and you need to go and visit the property, separately, or maybe the property is empty or their friend's got a key or whatnot, try your darndest to get an appointment to meet with the owner, because that is so, so critical. Well, that's my story. Thank you very much. I hope you found something interesting. If you did, please feel free. By the way, if you have any questions, please pop them below in the comments on the blog, and I'll try and answer them as best as possible. Subscribe to get my newsletter if you'd like any more training, and please give me feedback so I understand whether I'm actually helping or not. Thank you very much. Oh, something else that I forgot to say, I beg your pardon, is that if you want to share this with anybody that you think would find this useful, please feel free to do that. Share it as widely as possible. Thank you and have a good day.